Sometimes the things we don't see can make a card design even better. Let me show you what I mean. Foiling's still a hot trend these days, and I like the look, but I haven't wanted to invest. You can use heat embossing to get a similar look, but here's another option. This is an old background I created ages ago with distress oxide sprays and a dotted stencil. It's really time to start using some of these backgrounds up. Now this is a die cut, the Circle Quilt cover plate die from Altenew, cut from some mirror gold cardstock. I think this shiny gold will give the best faux foil result. I chose this die because the outlines are narrow. It doesn't have to be a cover plate, it could be a standalone die, but I think an outline will work better than something solid. It could be a word die. Hang on for that. I could just glue this on top and that would be pretty, but it'll look like a die cut glued onto a background. To make it look more like it was foiled into the background, I grabbed the die and I used an embossing sandwich in my Platinum 6 to emboss this background panel. You don't want to cut through it, just to give it a bumpy surface like this. This is actually another illusion, using a die for embossing rather than an embossing folder. But I'm taking this further. This intricate die cut is going to kind of click right into place when I put it over top of the bumpy background. I added liquid glue to the back of the die cut and then I put it in place. Now this looks like all those little background pieces have been inlaid into the gold outline, right? That's more like faux inlay. But there's still one more little step, and that's to run it through my die cutting machine, this time with just plates, no dies or embossing folder. That squishes everything together and flattens out the background bumps and the rounded edges of the gold die cut and makes it all flat again. And that gold now really looks like it was foiled into the background, doesn't it? Next, I tried something a little different. I glued a gold congrats word to a shadow that was cut from another background from that same session. And without any embossing on the shadow this time, I just ran them through with just the plates. It squished it together just as well as previously, so clearly you don't even need to do the embossing step for the background. And what you're seeing on the gold is the texture of all the cuts on my top plate that I used. I was disappointed at first, and to avoid this, all you have to do is use a piece of printer paper between the die cut and your top plate. But the more I looked at it, the more I kind of like that hairline fracture pattern, so that's always an option. One more illusion, and that's that I cut the shadow for my sentiment from the piece I'm using as the mat behind my faux foil panel. This allows you to get a similar look for your shadow, even if you don't have any more of the matching paper. It's a great way to stretch your unique homemade backgrounds like this, or expensive metallic specialty cardstock, or patterned paper that you only have so much of. No one will ever know that there's a hole in the mat. So let's build on that. Here's another background for my bin. This one's gel printed with shimmery acrylic paint using the circle grid stencil from a Colorful Life Designs. I want to build a grid of 9 hearts on the front of my card. There's no way I can get 9 of these hearts from this one piece. I guess I can get 8, but that doesn't give me much choice in where they're coming from. So I cut 7. And then another background from my bin. This one's just kind of ink blended. And to add a little texture and interest, I tried using my DIY smoosher from last week's video to smoosh some water over top. Now here's the illusion. I started placing my hearts, top center and then the bottom center. Then, to make it look like a grid of 9, I cut 3 hearts in half. Now it looks like they're going over the edge of the background panel, but they're definitely still part of a bigger pattern, right? And now you have a choice. If you only have 5 of your shape, you can use that hole in the center as a place for your sentiment. This is a love die from Satin stamp. Or, if you do have more, like I do, you could fill in the middle and really make it look like a grid. So the magic here is making 5 or 6 hearts look like 9 hearts. I went without the center heart because it left my sentiment a little more legible, and I popped up all the hearts with some foam tape. Now I've got 2 hearts left, but this pattern really could use some definition, like a frame. This heart die is a one-off, not from a nesting set. So I cut another one from black and I cut that one in half. Then I used each half of the black heart behind the patterned heart, positioning them so that they're showing evenly on each side. This trick works better with some shapes than others, so you can experiment to see what works for you. I added this heart to a background I created with some frosted silver cardstock that I had glued multiple of those love die cuts to. This is an example of faux embossing folder, but I have an even better example coming up. But if you love the look of metallic cardstock in an embossing folder, you can get the look with die cuts. Card 4 has a couple of illusions. This is another piece from my background pile. I want my die cut word to stand out, but also match my background. So I chose a sentiment with a shadow, and I cut my word. And it's important to cut it from the place where you want it to end up on your card. So now I have my die cut word that matches the background, and I can cover the hole in the background with the shadow that's slightly bigger than the hole. That's just a bit of a variation on cutting your word from your mat. Next, I've got this kind of snowflake circle from Paper Rose Studios, backed with a piece of pink cardstock. I want to use it instead of the O in the joy word, but it's a bit too big. On its own, I could just cut the joy in half and spread it as wide as I wanted to allow for that snowflake O. But this time, because I want to use that background, I'm limited by where the joy hole is. If I move the pieces too far apart, you'll see the spaces. Still, there is a bit of wiggle room because the gold shadow is a little bit bigger than the hole. I spread the two pieces as far apart as I could, and it's still a bit more of an overlap than I had hoped for, but it's definitely legible. Next, I've got a pair of techniques that I wanted to try to see if they gave similar results to using an embossing folder. I was kind of inspired by this Poinsettia embossing folder that came out earlier this year. I'm starting with some watercolor cardstock and an old Hero Art stencil here, and really I wanted some thick white texture paste, but all I have on hand is this pearly stencil butter, so that's going to have to do for today. I spread it as thick as I could because I want quite a raised look to the panel. I put the excess back into the jar and I set the panel aside to dry. I rushed to my kitchen to clean my tools before the paste dried on them. The other idea for getting that look of an embossing folder was to use die cuts. This is similar to that silver tone-on-tone background I made earlier. This time, both the base and the waffle flower poinsettia die cuts are cut from watercolor cardstock, so they're really thick and giving a nice amount of texture. The little details of the cutout dots in the petals also adds a nice detail, I think. I glued them down onto my panel in a mix of the small and medium sizes, letting some of them go over the edge. I used quite a lot of liquid glue because I know I want to add a lot of water later on, and I don't want anything lifting up. To give this even more of a custom look, I used one of my old favorites, a polka dot cover plate die from a Jillian Vance design, and I cut out a few dots from watercolor cardstock and I added them here and there amongst the poinsettias. I let this one dry for quite a long time to be sure that the glue had completely set before I would add water. Now I actually think this is beautiful just white on white. I think it has great crisp texture and it really confirms the idea of getting the look of embossing by using die cuts. Next, I got out 4 of my little Lindy's shakers. These are watercolor powders and I shook them out over my dry panel. I've got a red, a pink, kind of a purpley red, and a yellow. When I spritzed water over top, oh my, those colors just burst into life, and that purple clearly has some blue in it. I have to admit that I find watercoloring powders a little bit tricky. You need enough water to get things dissolved in mixing and to get coverage, but too much water is going to leave you with more of a washy look. I love how the die cuts were kind of trapping some of the colors where they landed, and I really wanted to try and preserve those little areas of burst colors. It's just a bit hard to find that balance sometimes. But when I thought I had it, I lifted the panel out of the container and put it onto a towel to dry. And then I went back in with the same colors and did the same thing to the panel with the pearly paste. This one ended up with a bit more of a blend. It's pretty, but maybe not as remarkable as the other one. Once they dried, I finished them off with the same Merry Word die cut from Simon Says Stamp and some dark green accents. The card with the stencil butter is very pretty, but I don't get a faux embossing feel from it. Wonder if it's because of the paste I used. I'll have to try it again sometime with some texture paste. This one, on the other hand, is probably one of my favorites that I've made in the last few months. The drama of the texture really does look like a 3D embossing folder. I added a white narrow mat to match my Merry sentiment word, and then put it on a wider green mat to pick up those darker spots in the flowers. Card making illusions can be used to mimic another technique, to maximize supplies, or just to get a different look from what you've already got in your stash. If you enjoyed these card making illusions, I know you're going to love this video filled with even more magical ideas for you. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.